Welcome to the Winners Win podcast, the podcast that highlights awesome people in Kansas City and the secrets to their success. I'm your host, Jaime Simpson. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of NetStandard right here in Kansas City. At NetStandard, we manage technology so that our clients can focus on running their business. Today, our guest is Tim Webster. He's the chairman and CEO of Heirloom Brands. Okay. Hey, Tim.
Hi
Thanks
there.
for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
You found us
fun.
down here.
It's exciting.
That's great. Well, for those who don't know you, Tim, why don't you start by just doing a little self-introduction of sort of who you are. You wear many interesting hats, so maybe you could.
So newly grandfather to Cal and Timothy is probably where I'd like to start. But
that's right. You have a new
pretty
one.
exciting. But,
and how old is he now?
He's 2.5 months old.
And then you have an older one.
Well, no, that's my first.
Oh, your first.
Our oldest is first, and the other two kids I have are not married. So happily excited to be grandpa for the first time.
Oh,
but
that's
professionally,
exciting.
Which is probably what you were, in addition to marrying my college sweetheart 37 years ago.
So you made a good choice.
She made a good choice, yes. She
We'll
definitely tells people that she asked me out, which is sort of a funny interpretation of me flirting with her for 3 years and her finally getting it together. But anyway, professionally, I grew up in an entrepreneurial family. My grandfather was an entrepreneur. My grandmother was an entrepreneur. My other grandfather was an entrepreneur. Both my parents started businesses. And I knew I didn't want to work for my older brother. Hopefully he won't hear this, my whole life. So I started my second chapter, which was getting trained in finance and accounting. Initially a short tenure in that profession, with consulting with entrepreneurs being what I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. The first part of that work was looking into the history and second guessing what people had done. I found that to be of very little interest and no redeeming value. So I wanted to be looking out the front of the car, where are we going? And so I found myself working in strategic planning, which led to some stuff that I really didn't know anything about, but ended up doing, helping people put in systems, because I didn't know you at the time. So we, from there, got introduced to my first role at American Italian Pasta Company when they hired us. And that was a 17-year run. And I grew up there professionally, had a mentor that was the president of Kellogg Foods. And after leaving there in 2005, I decided I wanted to go back into the more early stages. So I formed Growth Consulting and Investments, where my hope was to find high potential entrepreneurial companies that needed the sophistication. So sort of the fractional concept, needed the sophistication of someone that had built successful businesses and brands and organizations and systems and processes, and needed capital but weren't ready for the institutional capital, formal private equity and what have you. So I got involved in 6 or 7 companies as an investor and an advisor. Liked that, didn't love it, because you couldn't always persuade them to do what you knew in your heart and soul was the right thing to do. So as a consultant, as you well know, sometimes your advice is left on the cutting room floor.
Sure.
So that led me to a role as a partner, and I think my title was COO, but was involved with 2 other partners in running and building Zycar, which is a fabulous business. We sold that to a competitor that was private equity backed after a great 6-year run. Got to travel all over the world, selling a product, cigar accessories that the consumers were in love with. So it was really fun. Traveling with my partners was like going around with John Bon Jovi to cigar shops. So I loved that. It was really fun, and it was a great business. And we built an amazing organization, which will be a recurring theme. And then most recently, we've formed a partnership with 10 other business owners in Kansas City. People would recognize names like Dave Lockton and the pals from Yellow Freight. And we all grew up in the Young Presidents Organization, which I was very fortunate to be part of as a young guy. You know, I was made president at AIPC in my late 20s. Didn't know what I was doing, but YPO helped in terms of networking, and those guys have become 30-year friends of mine. And So we created an investment partnership, and we buy interests in operating businesses. We've had 2 businesses that we acquired that we've since sold, and now our main focus is in something called Heirloom Brands. It owns a business called Farmer Direct Foods, and that is about sustainability in agriculture, and I'm sure we can get into more depth there, but that's a very long-winded profile of who I am.
Well, you've done a lot of interesting things. So what motivates you? I mean, you've changed so many times. What is it now, grandfather of one, that really motivates you to do all of the many things that
Someone that I worked with in my early career sent me a note on LinkedIn recently that brought a big tear to my eye and made me feel really good. He said, "I love seeing you at it again, reimagining the future." And so I'm a builder. I look at what I think a business could be and then figure out where are we, and then build a strategic plan around what do we need to do to move in that direction, build that beautiful vision that we have, qualitative, quantitative. So I'm a builder of organizations, brands, teams, people, and that's what I love to do. And I do love to work. I don't even imagine the ability to retire. I get up early and I love to get after it. There are times where then I can take a break and goof off, but I love being part of building something.
Would you describe yourself as are you more of a visionary, or are you more of an integrator?
Sure. I'm very familiar with the EOS framework. I'd have to say that I hope that I'm both. I'm definitely an integrator.
Probably are, right?
I'm definitely an integrator. So I like to make sure to know how the trains run on time. At Zycar, it was very entrepreneurial when I got there, and I had a phrase, "Let's make the routine so that our brightest people can work on complex problems and unlocking new opportunities," because everything was not routine. Everything was, felt like very laborious just to put a standard order out. And so I definitely have the integrator with a background in finance, systems, process engineering, but I also think I'm a visionary. I spend a lot of time daydreaming about the business that we own today. Farmer Direct Foods has the chance to have a huge impact on Kansas farmers and bring a better way of farming, which, for just in a nutshell, for those that don't know, regenerative agriculture, it's only 20% of consumers today know what it is. So let me take a sidebar and say it's about maintaining the health of the soil long term. There are a lot of different ways that farming either degrades the quality of the soil or improves it.
Right.
And central and western Kansas is a great case study because of the Dust Bowl. Previously, they weren't taking care of it, and the big gust came and there went the soil. So they, through cover crops and reduced tilling and what have you, have really learned that rotating crops, biodiversity, bringing livestock on, keeping water in the soil, keeping the carbon in the soil, can create which is in their long-term interest, especially if you're talking about multi-generational farming families.
Sure.
So soil health is number one for us. Number two is, the way you do that either releases carbon in the atmosphere, because nitrogen is the primary fertilizer, and when you till the soil after nitrogen's been on it, you release carbon into the atmosphere. So if we can do no-till and cover crop farming, we're actually capturing carbon. So farm agriculture, people may or may not know that, is much bigger impact on the environment than cars and planes and trains. So changing the way we farm so that we're capturing carbon in the earth instead of releasing it is a big part of what regenerative agriculture is about. And the third is conserving water. And so I feel very called to this. I don't know that we're ever going to put a dent in the universe, but we're sure going to take a swing at it. And we're going to help Kansas farmers create the products that I think 5 and 10 years from now, the generation of consumers that care more and are interested in these kinds of things. And I can tell you my 3 kids, who are from 26 to 32, are much more aware of how the food they eat is grown, by whom, in what kind of conditions, what impact it's having, and they're very attuned to what they're putting in their body. And the whole other part of our business is that Farmer Direct is convincing people that you can eat the whole grain, you should eat the whole grain, and it can be every bit as delicious as the highly processed conventional products, and it's better for you, it's better for the farmers, and it's better for the earth. Those are our 3 farmer directives.
That's great. I mean, we have a new client that's an agricultural researcher in that same part of Kansas, and I know there's a lot of work being done on how to make agriculture more sustainable. And
exactly.
That is definitely an area I know very little about, but it's really
exciting.
You can tell you're really passionate about
Manhattan,
it.
Kansas, K-State is an epicenter of all this.
Right.
The Land Institute is there. And so there's a lot of good things going on in central Kansas right now in that regard.
Yeah. So have you always been passionate about food?
Well, as a consumer, for sure. Yeah.
Work.
I mean, it's so funny. My mom showed me before she passed. She came across something I did in the 3rd grade, and I had drawn you had to say what you were going to be when you grew up, and you had to draw it. And said I was going to be a spaghetti chef. So I was pretty close to on the mark, but missed it by a little bit. CEO of a company that ultimately was making 1 billion pounds of pasta a year was a pretty fun run, but
it's probably a step.
I love to cook. I love to eat. So, being in the food business now for approaching 20 years of my career, I think it's fair to say I have a passion for food and wine and the good life.
That's great. Well, it's always great if you can turn something you actually enjoy into something that you. But what gave you? I mean, obviously you're passionate about sustainability and some of the things that you were talking about. Was there
not really
a birth of that? Did you have some moment where that became really important to you, or is it just something that the more you learn about it?
I was just the lucky one that picked up the phone when the founder of American Italian was looking for an accountant to hire. So it was only about my 3rd week at Arthur Young, and they called and said, we're looking for consultants to do IT work, accounting and finance. So it was just, but what I did know, I always had the philosophy that if I'm going to spend 10 or 12 hours a day away from the things I love, my family, my hobbies, then I want to do something where I'm not miserable. So just to be silly, right? So I'm like, I want to be part of building something great. And this guy I met was like, we're going to build the world's biggest, most efficient pasta company. And, at the time he was sitting in a soybean field in Excelsior Springs in a trailer. So I got up there and I was like, this guy's either total visionary, he's a whack job, right? So anyway, it was just good fortune. And then, the other things that I've been involved in aren't exclusively food. We've been in probiotic material and other kinds of some tech-enabled services and some tech businesses. So I've worked in a lot of different things, but a common theme is if I'm going to spend time on it, I want to believe that it can be special. And if it can't, then I'm probably going to lose interest pretty rapidly. Yeah. So I think that's the thing is, can this be great? And if it can be great, can I add something to the mix to help make it great? And if that's the case, then, give me a shovel and let's go.
That's great. I mean, you got to have some way to decide how you're going to spend your time,
for
right?
Sure. And sometimes you get to be lucky enough to make choices, and sometimes you just got to take a job. And I've been blessed and did not.
Well, and sometimes you make the choice,
position,
and it's
right.
not the choice that you thought it was going to be, right? I think that sometimes being the right person in the right place at the right time it's a little bit of lightning in a bottle. Like you hope to find it, but you don't always find it. And so you have to be, having appreciation for when you do is important.
And I've been in cycles and had really positive highs and challenging lows. And I've been in environments where the market is expanding really rapidly and the market's contracting. So taking it away from my personal experience to coaching my children or mentees that I'm involved with is get into a market that's growing with a company that's taking market share inside that growing, and you're going to be a lot smarter than if you're in a market that's contracting and you're with a company that's losing market share in a contracting market, then everybody's really dumb. opportunities very limited, and it's no fun. So, you know, the one thing, you know, like the business you're in, you want to find these situations where you have a tailwind. And as we look at sustainability as an investment partnership, because the businesses that I mentioned that we bought and sold were in sustainability. They were in drinkware and food containers. We competed with little brands like Yeti and Hydro Flask and Swell, and we fell in love with that idea of doing good while we're doing well.
Yeah.
So this investment partnership wasn't originally founded with a sustainability thesis, but it is what you're talking about after kissing a lot of frogs and looking at businesses that were for sale. And in most cases, the businesses that are for sale, there's a pretty good reason why they're for sale. It's not because they're hitting on all cylinders and everybody's having a blast. So going through that process, we found that just it's a good way to invest. ESG, you know, environmental, social, and governance practices, thinking about your other constituents instead of just profit, thinking about people and the planet and making decisions that are more holistic. We were doing that anyway, and now we're seeing that it can be applied in a way that unlocks opportunities. And some of those businesses that are early in that space maybe don't have all the experiential horsepower.
The expertise.
So
sure.
we that's one of our sayings in our partnership is experienced capital unlocking potential. That's what the founders of our group, Omar Holdings, that's what we're all about. They have, my partners have a lot of resources, they have a lot of choices, and they like what we're doing because they get to get close enough to it to feel involved, but you know, after we get in there or they help us solve a problem or open a door through a networking, they can go back to what else they're doing. But they like being a part of owning the company directly. And when we formed it, the Dow was at 36,000 and they were like, we're not excited about buying the Dow at 36,000, which turns out to have been a pretty smart call 5 years ago. So we've been successful to date and we're really excited about what we're working on right now.
Okay, Tim, I'm going to take you back to something that you mentioned as you were talking about Heirloom, and that was whole grains. Mm-hmm. And I know it's a topic that, you know, really in every facet of life, everybody's talking about carbs and grains and gluten and all of those things that people are trying to avoid. And so you have sort of an interesting take on that, and I would be interested to hear how you would explain it to a lay person like myself.
I'm like a salmon swimming upstream. So let me first say, if you have any interest in this topic, read Stephen Yaffa, Y-A-F-A's book, Grain of Truth.
Okay.
And it totally debunks the book Wheat Belly and Wheat Brain
I've read that one.
Hack science. And it's a little bit like what led to the opioid epidemic. There's one little anecdotal clip that somebody took out of context. It struck a chord with consumers and it just became a flywheel thing. And you know, as one of my partners, we have a meme in our investment deck that says we've been eating bread for 5,000 years and now in a decade everyone's allergic to gluten. WTF. So let me back up and say two different things. Science around grain and wheat in particular in the 60s, centered at the University of Minnesota, unlocked concepts that dramatically increased the yield per acre of wheat production. That was an incredibly important thing to feed the growing population on this planet. The way they achieved that involved creating much more complex grains that aren't genetically modified, because wheat isn't a genetically modified, but they're crossbred. So I don't know where you go from blending poodles and labs to genetically modifying. So that's above my pay grade, but wheat is not genetically modified, but it's been re-engineered through hybridization. They create hybrids by crossing two strains. And the chromosome structure of today's mass-produced wheat has like 40 chromosomes in it, and the ancient grains like turkey red wheat, which was the original, and einkorn, which the original varieties of wheat that were brought to Kansas because of the growing conditions here, have like 3 or 4. Now, the issue is, as that grain has evolved and fed the masses, which was really a great thing to have happen, about a third of us as humans haven't kept pace with the evolution of that grain, and we can't digest it without inflammation and other not so ready for television type experiences. So our premise is, let's go back, for those that care to the way things used to be, because those, if you test them side by side, they taste very different. They have very different nutritional profiles. And so we're also, heirloom is one of three ways to describe these ancient grain varieties: ancient, heirloom, or heritage. All three of those are largely interchangeable describing. Now, we chose heirloom, and we were thrilled to find out that we could trademark it and it wasn't protected and those kinds of things. Because heirloom also has the inference of, like in tomatoes, you know that an heirloom tomato is going to be a good tomato, right? Why? Because you just know that, right? It's what we call cognitive continuation. And heirloom also means that the seed variety has been passed down over time.
Sure.
Often through sometimes, geographies, sometimes religious sects, families. So we love that part of the story. Ancient grain, good, but heirloom, the fact that this was protected and passed along, we like that. So that's why our holding company is called Heirloom Brands. So the first part is the wheat, and I'll get to your question about whole grains in a minute. The second thing then is how it's milled and converted into flour has changed a lot. And you take the outer bran coat off and leave the inner part of the kernel, and most of the nutrients are in that outer bran coat. So when they started milling flour during when the population in the US was growing rapidly after World War II, they found that they had stripped all the nutrients out of it, so then they started to enrich it. So when you see the phrase enriched flour, you're like, that's great, they've enriched it. Well, they didn't need to enrich it if they hadn't stripped all the value, all the nutritional value off of it.
Right.
So how did they do that? By taking a whole grain and stripping off the parts that have all the nutrients in it. So the reason people don't eat whole wheat all the time, and a lot of people do, I love whole wheat, I love multigrain. So again, acquired taste as opposed to white bread. I haven't eaten any white bread in a long time. Except at Gates, right? So
sure.
The idea that whole grain products are actually products that have left all the nutrients in. So what are the reasons why you wouldn't want to eat whole wheat and want more of a derivative wheat? It's darker in color, it has more ash content, so that's flavor and texture profile. It has tannins in it. So the company that we acquired, Farmer Direct Foods, was originally founded as the American White Wheat Association. So I like Farmer Direct a lot better, but their premise with these farmers out in central and western Kansas were growing this white wheat that when you make a whole wheat product out of it, it doesn't have some of those attributes because it's not red wheat, it's white wheat. So some of that color difference isn't there. It's lower in ash, it's lower in tannins. So it's like you can have the flavor profile of the milled flour that you like in a whole wheat format. And so that was the genesis of what we own today, Farmer Direct Foods. And we also make red whole wheat that, our Haley S., our product specialist, R&D person, treats us all the time, bringing in cinnamon rolls and all kinds of things, that you would think, pizza crust, things that you would expect to be made from a derivative flour, conventional flour. She's making out of whole wheat and they're delicious. So we think that over time, that story will resonate and consumers, particularly if we can make it taste delicious and consistent with the way they want to experience it, it's going to be a no-brainer to say, and oh, by the way, it's cheaper and more efficient to make a whole wheat product than it is to go through all the additional steps of stripping all the good stuff off and then adding back in enriched nutrients. So it seems like common sense to me.
So where is it in the market? Like if I wanted to buy
Sure.
something, what would I buy?
Yeah, that's a great, thank you for that beautiful question. So we bought Farmer Direct March 1st, and October 1st, we launched its own brand. So where you would find our product today is in packages of King Arthur baking flour
Okay.
all over the
Yeah.
United States. So the whole wheat, high protein, whole wheat, stone ground product in the King Arthur portfolio is made in our facility.
Okay.
And grown by our growers.
Yeah.
Under a identity assured, so we can tell you exactly what the bag that you would buy. We can tell you what farm it came off of, what seed stock it came out of, what the growing conditions were, and what impact you have by buying that bag on the environment. Now, we are just now launching our brand, so it'll be in all the Balls food stores, Hen Houses and Price Choppers next week, I believe, if not the following week. We're on the we're in the shelves of Smart and Final in California as of next Wednesday, and our Amazon site will be active here in the next couple of days. So we are building our own branded sales and marketing infrastructure on top of an incredible grower network and a really nice milling facility. But what our investment thesis is, we can build on the very wonderful relationship we have with King Arthur and build a complementary business that's both selling bakeries, and there's two here that I'd love to say, but I don't know that I'm allowed to say yet that we're going to be their supplier. But we're excited about that. And then, also to direct to consumers through specialty natural grocery outlets. And we've got a couple of the big ones that we're talking to that would be a game changer for us. So
great.
Stay
That's
tuned.
Exciting.
Stay tuned.
Well, that's great. Okay, well, to wrap up, let me ask you one question that I ask everybody,
Okay.
and that's, as you think about your career and all of the things that you've done that have made you successful, how would you boil that down to one piece of advice?
So we just finished 2.5 days of strategic planning with our team for the first time. And I gotta make sure I don't get emotional, because I did during during our planning session. So my mission statement is to build things of sustaining quality and excellence with people I trust and care about and feel the same way about me. So that's my personal mission statement. The most valuable thing, or the thing that I would pass along, is it really is all about the people that you attract and grow together and build. And you have to have a good market opportunity. You have to have a good strategy. But if you don't have an organization that can effectively activate that, you don't have a chance. So it's be relentless in the pursuit of those game-changing people. That I heard a podcast not long ago, and the person's mission was to make stunning hires. And so I think that's what it's all about.
Yeah, it's funny. I've asked that question now 6 times, and I think at least 4 people said something very similar about people. And I don't know, in all different industries, all different types of jobs, but it really does come down to who you're going.
And the second one is be lucky. So because I have seen really smart people. It goes back to the choice thing we talked about. I've seen really smart, capable people not have success because the market moved against them.
Sure.
I've got a friend that's just transitioned out of a business. He's a genius. He's as brilliant a marketer and executive as I've ever been around. And the market just moved out of the impact of the pandemic against them. And so that was very unfortunate, and he did make choices to address that. But so I remember one CEO was on a podcast, and he very controversially said, all this stuff about the famous CEOs that we talk about, he said it's 85% luck. So I don't know that I can get all the way to that number, but I said, surround yourself with great people, find a good market, have a good strategy, and then hope the wind's blowing at your back.
Great. I couldn't agree more.
Okay.
Thanks for being with me, Tim.
Thank you. That was fun. I'll do it anytime.
Great.